What is regenerative? What is local? What can I do? That's this summer, friends. That feels like something that matters to me. Does it to you?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to introduce to you someone who I've introduced in this room before, Thomas Locke. Thomas is a new friend of mine, and my first introduction to Thomas was an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News about regenerative agriculture. That got my attention. I said to some folks in this room in December when he was here, I don't save articles from the Dallas Morning News, but I do when Thomas Locke has something to say. And one of multiple ones that he has written is right here in my hands on July 30th, 2023. It was entitled Revisit the Roots of Our Food System. Lab-grown chicken, we aren't beyond the laws of nature, and neither is our food. In it, he talks about industrial agriculture, and he'll touch on that tonight. And one paragraph after he describes industrial agriculture and some pieces of that, he says, this raises the question from anyone with a semblance of reverence and respect for our inextricable connection to nature. What the hell are we doing? And he closes with, the consumer crossroads ahead is not simply a choice between eating plants and animals, but a food system dependent on land stewards or lab rats. A shift to regenerative food systems will not happen with a single blow, but rather a billion taps of the chisel from conscientious consumer, writing a new chapter in the story of civilized life by spending money differently. Find your chisel and buy some food, real food. Thomas, welcome back to the farm.
Thank you. Whoop. My microphone came out.
Uh-oh. Rodney, fix it.
No, it's all good. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
I was really appreciative of Rodney and Sarah for inviting me until David just sang, and now I realize it was the greatest act of sabotage that's ever been put on anyone in this world. So that was fantastic, David. Thank you. Let's give David another round of applause. It's truly great. I also want to say thank you to Rodney and Sarah, not just for having me here tonight, but for hosting these gatherings together and for being so intentional about the way that they live and about the community that they build in this space. There aren't many people like Rodney and Sarah in this world, and so I would also like for everyone to give them a round of applause, a much deserved round of applause. And I want to thank all of y'all for being here tonight to explore a topic that I personally find exciting, important, and extremely relevant in today's world. I was going to promise to not hold y'all hostage for too long, but I am going to hold y'all hostage for a while, so settle in. And I hope that you can find something exciting about this that we can talk about a little bit later. So the question posed is, what is regenerative? And to regenerate is to restore or reestablish, which of course requires that something has first been damaged or desecrated. To regenerate is not to return something to its original state, because that is impossible. We cannot erase trauma, but we can change the way that we are in a relationship with nature. In a few minutes, I'll discuss the nuts and bolts of what it takes to be regenerative, but in order to understand why this is important, and this is really what I'm going to talk about tonight, we must first recognize the path that led us to the need to regenerate land. Ultimately, the way that we grow food and live in relationship with nature comes down to our mindset. Recognizing our individual and cultural mindset is the key to shifting regenerative agriculture from a niche segment in an otherwise massive and industrial food system to the preeminent food system of the world, which might sound like a dream, but I really do believe it's the way that it should be. In my view, changing the way that we grow and produce food is the first and best step toward building a more just, equitable, and sustainable way of life for all life on this planet. Because when you boil it all down, the way that we grow and raise food is the greatest expression of our relationship as human beings to Mother Nature. And human beings are part of nature and completely dependent on nature, regardless of how much we think that we aren't. Roughly 12,000 years ago, this relationship took a sharp turn. Much has been made recently as to whether or not we are officially in the, quote, Anthropocene, which is a new geological era in which human beings have become the primary drivers of environmental change. A panel of geologists voted this down last March, following a 15-year debate. By their current timeline of Earth's 4.6 billion year history, our world right now is in the Holocene, which began 12,000 years ago following the end of the last ice age. Once the ice sheets that covered much of Asia, Europe, and North America began receding, the weather patterns changed, the Earth warmed, and the seeds of human civilization took root, following what today we consider to be the beginnings of the agricultural revolution. At that time, various cultures, for unknown reasons, began adopting a new way of life, one built around a totalitarian system of agriculture to grow and store food. I'm going to say that word a lot tonight, and so I want to define it. By totalitarian, I mean without reverence or respect for the laws of nature. A system designed to exploit land and ecosystems in service of human wants and desires. It's important to also note that not all people at that time decided that that was a great way to live. Tribal populations continued to thrive across the globe, while others began sowing the seeds of civilization. The basic difference between the two groups was their mindset, one largely following the laws of nature, the other actively denying them. And as this civilized mindset took root, populations began to center around fields of agriculture. We grew in numbers and became entirely dependent on the food we grew and stored rather than food naturally provided for us by nature. And this all might seem normal and perhaps underwhelming to y'all. Thomas, we get this. We've been in history before. But it is hard to overstate the importance of this monumental shift in human behavior and in the human mindset at that time. In the 300,000 years that our species, Homo sapiens, have lived on this planet, totalitarian agriculture and civilization has existed for only 4% of that time. Or to put that on a 365-day calendar, we embraced all of this on about December 17th. 12,000 years into the experiment, and we are still in the agricultural revolution. The problem is that totalitarianism is in direct conflict with the laws of nature. The mountain of unintended consequences as a result of our way of life can no longer be ignored. But first, we have to recognize that they exist. In his commencement speech at Kenyon College, the author David Foster Wallace, who wrote the novel Infinite Jest and a few other novels, began by sharing the story of three fish. There's these two fish that are swimming along until another fish swims past and says to him, "How's the water today, boys?" The two fish swim on for a little while longer until one of them looks at the other and says, "What the hell is water?" The point of his story is that the most obvious and important realities are so often the hardest to understand and talk about. Such is the case with modern civilized culture and the totalitarian industrial system of agriculture that fuels it. This is the water that we all swim in. To understand the true state of things, we first have to understand that this is water. I believe that human activity, and specifically the way that we grow food, is the primary driver of environmental change. I think that's an obvious statement, to be honest. A belief that yet remains highly contested, not just among geologists defining a period of history, but among all people. The water that we swim in suggests that it is normal to have 100,000 square foot grocery stores that stock thousands of items that we will never need, available to us every day, and a food system designed to further our addiction to salt, fat, and sugar. The water that we swim in suggests it is normal for rural agrarian communities to suffer from economic stagnation, where the average farm debt today is $1.5 million, and the total farm sector debt is $535 billion, which has doubled since the year 2000. And all the while, I just put this in here at the last second, the largest commodities broker in the world, Cargill Incorporated, has a family with no fewer than 14 billionaires. The water that we swim in suggests that it is normal for the gross domestic product of America, in large part, to be dependent on an exploitive system of agriculture, one that desecrates life in soil, on land, in air, and in the water, a system of agriculture that is responsible for our public health epidemic. Mother culture, as Daniel Quinn calls it in his book Ishmael, suggests all of this is designed to make us happier and allow us to live more meaningful and fulfilling lives. I disagree. People that grew up in the early 20th century were no less happy because they could only eat fresh peaches and tomatoes in the summer. Quite the opposite. It seems clear to me that the scientists who fail to acknowledge that we are in the Anthropocene are like the fish that don't know what water is, and they are not alone. It is hard to see that which has been around us our entire lives, and much easier to see and understand contrasting realities. So many of us are walking through a forest, but we can't see the trees. In case you haven't noticed, I love metaphors. I could write a book on metaphors. Fortunately for us, our cultural mindset is not required by a law of nature. It's a choice. We don't have to live our lives and produce food in an entirely destructive manner. Sarah and Rodney, Jeff, other farmers are an example of that. We don't have to do this way. It's a story that we are enacting, but stories can change. I believe the agricultural revolution was in fact the beginning of the Anthropocene, the age where humans were the primary drivers of environmental change, and I believe people have known this for a very, very long time. Sarah and I emailed about this earlier this week, and I didn't tell her I was going to talk about this, and we kind of disagree on some translations with the Bible. But the book of Genesis, we don't disagree, we just have, one different word. The book of Genesis, which we're all familiar with, written well after the beginning of the agricultural revolution, begins with God creating everything. The second chapter involves a garden and our relationship as humans to that garden. Adam and Eve are placed in this oasis of natural resources and told to tend it and keep it. Instead, they eat from the tree of knowledge, forbidden by God, and they are banished from this blessing of nature, forced to design their own garden. The story of the Garden of Eden is, in my view, a metaphor with clear moral implications about our decision to deny the laws of nature because we believe that we could create something better. It is a story about our inability to replicate nature and the dangers of believing that we can do so. It is about our inability to create something better than God or Mother Nature naturally provides. God provided this garden to Adam and Eve, but it was not theirs. When humans decided to eat from the metaphorical tree of knowledge was when we decided to practice a new way of living that denied the fundamental laws of nature. And importantly, this was not when we decided to grow food. Evidence suggests tribal cultures had practiced agriculture for thousands of years before the agricultural revolution. It was when we developed a new mythology built around the idea that humans are separate from nature and exempt from nature's laws. The world was ours to conquer, as if our species were godlike. Genesis continues with the story of Adam and Eve's children, Cain and Abel. Cain tills the land. Their second-born Abel raises sheep on pasture. God favors Abel, which angers Cain, and God says to him something along the lines of, because it wasn't recorded, tend and keep this land, and I will favor you as well. Continue desecrating this land, and I will not. As a response, Cain did not tend and keep it. He murdered Abel. Now consider how civilized mythology of European settlers influenced how they were in relationship with this land in our country and the tribal populations that inhabited it when they got here. Very much like Cain. The story is as relevant today as it has ever been because our mindset has not changed. Some of y'all at this point might be wondering why I'm talking about the book of Genesis and the Anthropocene rather than regenerative agriculture, which is what's on your program. And that is because regenerative agriculture will only go as far as people are willing to take it, and we will never adopt a new system of agriculture until we recognize our way of life as nothing more than a mythology built around a corrosive cultural mindset that sprouted 12,000 years ago. The good news is that our mindset is a choice. We don't have to live this way. None of this is to say that we should abandon human civilization. That's an important point. It is to say that we can redefine what that means. We need to redefine our civilized mythology and create a new way of life, not separate from the laws of nature, but in harmony with them. We need to adopt a regenerative food system. And to do this, there are 3 basic steps. We must first acknowledge the corrosiveness of our mindset and the damage our species has caused. Once we acknowledge this, we need to understand that this is water. And we can move on to step 2, understanding the solution. The solution ultimately exists in embracing the fundamental laws of nature and the way that we produce food, which is a revolutionary concept when you compare that to the way that we grow food in an industrial manner. We need to observe the laws of nature. We need to observe the cycles of nature and then produce food in a way that honors these cycles with reverence, respect, and humility. To produce food in a way that supports life and fosters diversity. To be regenerative is to understand that the essence of nature is diversity. The final step is to do something about it, to implement it. To implement regenerative practices as farmers, as ranchers, as consumers, as entrepreneurs, all working together to build a healthy, vibrant, regenerative food system. I was hesitant to go into the nuts and bolts of what it means to be regenerative because that's, quote, going into the weeds, and I didn't want to bore y'all, but I'm going to go into the nuts and bolts here a little bit.
Do it.
On a ranch, these principles include not tilling the soil, keep living root systems year-round, seed and foster diverse plant species in every season, manage grazing animals with adaptive multi-paddock grazing systems, let your land rest and fully recover before going back to it, use no chemicals of any kind on land or animals, and always, always encourage and foster ecological diversity. For crop producers, the same basic principles apply. Use no-till planting systems. You want to always plant cover crops, no chemicals, and incorporate grazing animals when you can to add fertility. Every regenerative system understands and values the nearly infinite web of life that exists in soil. One handful of healthy soil contains more life forms than all humans that have ever lived on this planet. We now understand also how important our gut microbiome is as humans to a healthy life. The human body, in case y'all didn't know, does not digest food. The bacteria in our guts digest the food for us. And the exact same is true with soil. The more diverse and abundant microbes in the soil, the healthier it is. Regenerative farmers and ranchers understand that nature is complex, not complicated. A Ford F-150 is complicated, but humans can take it apart and put it back together. Nature, on the other hand, cannot be dismantled and put back together. It can be regenerated, but will forever be different. To understand that nature is complex and to consider the symbiotic relationship between soil, plants, and animals is the closest thing that I've ever come to experiencing a miracle. Einstein said that there were two ways to live. That you either believe that everything is a miracle or that nothing is a miracle. And regenerative agriculture helped me see that. It is the most amazing, magical thing to see oneself as part of this beautifully complex system rather than separate from it or greater than it. When I'm walking around the farm, I often think of myself or think of land like a human body. Back to the metaphor again. At birth, we are a collection of raw genetic material. Throughout life, we are shaped by events that happen to us, how our parents raise us, events that happen to us, relationships with others, traumas and joys. And there is incredible diversity in the human race. There is incredible diversity in this room today and the human experience. Yet we all share the commonality of being human. The same is true with land. The world is a collection of diverse landscapes and terrains that began billions of years ago and have experienced changes that shape what they are today. And like nature, humans are resilient and can adapt to traumas and hardships. A diverse and healthy ecosystem is similar to a diverse and loving community of people. And the stronger the ecosystem, the more resilient. That's the most powerful force of nature in my mind, to be diverse and resilient. However, there are some traumas that require much more intentionality to heal. It is not hard to imagine a human trauma that requires a very intentional approach to healing. And in nature, the greatest trauma that has occurred in the last 12,000 years is a direct result of, I know y'all know what the answer is, our system of agriculture. A few brief examples. The first mass extinction event in 65 million years is occurring right now because of us. Climate change presents an array of existential challenges. Groundwater supplies are rapidly declining, and 1/3 of all of our topsoil across the world has eroded in the last 50 years, a resource that takes thousands, perhaps millions of years to develop. But these traumas can be healed if we begin to change our mindset and the way that we grow and produce food. Consider my ranch for a second. When my ancestors settled the land in 1845, where my wife, son, and I now live, it was a Garden of Eden, in a way. A native grassland thousands of years in the making with rolling hills, mature hardwood trees, and a diversity of life unknown to anyone alive today, as it was across the country. As a result of tilling the land, growing monocultures, and breaking the cycles of nature, my family essentially rendered our land lifeless in a short 100 years. The land that my ancestors settled was akin to an Olympic athlete in its prime. And when my grandfather returned from World War II, he found the same athlete virtually lifeless in front of him. The end of World War II was also the beginning of the so-called Green Revolution, which is when we repurposed chemicals used in the war effort for agriculture. And instead of allowing the land to rest and regenerate, he pumped it full of drugs. The land sprung back to life, but remained far from healthy. The Green Revolution was a new era of agriculture and redefined what abundance meant to our culture, but maintained the same totalitarian mindset as those that came before. As a result, unintended consequences increased, with my grandfather always looking for a chemical solution, which led to further unintended consequences. One of the many unintended consequences of his actions was a decrease in organic matter in our soil. I love talking about organic matter, and this is going into the weeds again, but if you were to increase organic matter by 1%, you allow 1 acre of soil to sequester an additional 10 tons of carbon and hold an additional 20,000 gallons of water. Consider what increasing organic matter by 2% on the 895 million acres of farmland across our country could do. We could draw down an additional 18 billion tons of carbon and hold an additional 36 trillion gallons of water. And that's by increasing it 2%. From 1845 until the beginning of our regenerative journey in 2014, the organic matter in the soil on our farm went from what was probably around 8 to 10% to 1.5%. Today, it is around 3% and growing. To believe that our species is somehow exempt from the laws of nature is akin to believing that our bodies do not require food, water, or oxygen. It is a ridiculous thought, yet it is the framework of our civilized mythology. Our culture values imagined creations above all else. National identity, technology, and above all, money. We could incentivize farmers with billions of dollars to implement regenerative practices on their farms and ranches. Instead, we are spending billions of dollars to develop new technology to better control and manipulate nature. We are also investing billions of dollars in artificial intelligence, something that Jillian and I talked about last night with friends at dinner, rather than embracing the brilliant system of nature that created us. Our civilized mythology forged a path for us to believe that imagined creations are somehow more powerful than the laws of nature, and that someday our ability to innovate will finally free us forever from the growing mountain of consequences that result from our way of life. We are addicted to this mindset, but unaware that it exists or that it is harming us, like an alcoholic that believes vodka is water and can't figure out why their life is falling apart or they feel like shit the next morning. It is hard for us to acknowledge that the foundation of our way of life is faulty, and much easier and profitable to believe technology and innovation will fix everything. So here's the question. How do we regulate ourselves to not eat from the tree of knowledge? To not believe that we are more powerful and knowing than nature? How do we reverse thousands of years of culture built around the decision to eat from this tree? How do humans unlearn the idea that nature is nothing more than a problem to be solved or a resource to exploit in the name of profit? How do we begin to understand that this is water and then create a new civilized way of life designed in harmony with the immutable laws of nature? Those alive today and everyone in this room are on the front lines of changing our relationship with nature if we choose to engage in that battle. A battle not waged against another nation for land, resources, or power, but rather a battle against a mindset and a mythology. A mindset and mythology that fostered the totalitarian system of agriculture that still exists today. I said earlier, Einstein said that there are only two ways to live. One where you believe in miracles and one where you don't. We all have a choice in this matter. Every day, we choose to write our own story in the way that we live our lives and we spend money, in the way that we are in a relationship with one another, and in the way that we value diversity. Our story need not be perfect. Mine is not. Far from it, in fact. Mother culture is a powerful force, and it surrounds us. To remove oneself or not participate in culture is not the goal, but rather to recognize it and then make more intentional choices to create a better world. Regenerative food systems will grow when more people make the choice to change their own story in big or small ways and support a new way of living in a relationship with nature. Wendell Berry once said, "There are no sacred or unsacred places, just sacred and desecrated places." It's our choice to regard those as sacred. Thank you all for patiently listening and for all that y'all do support regenerative agriculture. He said, "There are no sacred or unsacred places, just sacred and desecrated places." Yeah. Thank you all.
Amen.